What would you do if a poor stranger asked for help and you only had enough food for yourself? Would you walk away or would you share your last meal? Today's emotional and inspiring story follows a powerful female CEO who disguises herself as a poor woman to discover the truth about kindness. What she finds will change not only her life, but also the future of an honest single father and his little daughter forever. If you enjoy heartwarming stories with unforgettable endings, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Now let's get started. Emma Collins had built a reputation across America as one of the youngest and most successful CEOs in the retail industry. At only 36 years old, she led a company with thousands of employees, hundreds of stores, and annual profits that made business magazines place her on their front covers. Investors admired her intelligence, employees respected her discipline, and the media described her as a visionary leader. Yet behind the praise, Emma carried a growing frustration. Every report she received insisted that customers were delighted, employees were happy, and managers followed the company's values perfectly. Everything looked flawless on paper. But after reading anonymous complaints online and hearing stories from ordinary people, she began wondering whether the polished reports reflected reality or simply protected the people responsible for running the company. Emma believed numbers could measure profits, but they could never measure compassion. She often remembered the lessons her late father had taught her while growing up in Ohio. Before building a successful construction business, he had struggled for years and knew exactly how painful it felt to be ignored because of worn-out clothes or an empty wallet. He always told Emma that a person's true character appeared when helping someone who could offer nothing in return. Those words stayed with her long after his passing. Sitting alone in her luxurious office overlooking downtown Chicago, she realized she had become surrounded by executives who rarely stepped outside conference rooms. They discussed customer experience through charts instead of conversations. Emma wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. Instead of announcing another inspection that managers would prepare for weeks in advance, Emma created a secret plan. She instructed only her personal assistant, Grace, to arrange everything without informing anyone else. Grace looked surprised when Emma explained she wanted to disappear for an entire day without security guards, expensive clothes, or company vehicles. She would carry only $20 in cash, an old prepaid phone for emergencies, and wear clothes purchased from a thrift store. Grace worried about her safety and suggested hiring undercover security nearby. But Emma refused. "If people know someone is protecting me, they won't." "Behave naturally," she said. "I need to experience exactly what a struggling person experiences." Reluctantly, Grace agreed, after making Emma promise to check in every few hours. Early Saturday morning before sunrise, Emma parked her luxury car in a secure garage several miles away. She changed into faded jeans, worn sneakers, and an oversized gray hoodie with visible stitching around the sleeves. She tied her hair into a simple ponytail, removed her makeup, replaced her designer handbag with an old backpack, and slipped inexpensive reading glasses onto her face. Looking into the mirror, even she struggled to recognize herself. The confident billionaire who usually entered buildings through executive entrances had vanished. In her place stood an exhausted-looking woman who could easily be mistaken for someone searching for temporary work. Taking a deep breath, Emma stepped onto a busy Chicago street, determined to spend the day as an ordinary stranger with almost nothing. The city looked completely different without the comfort of wealth. Normally, chauffeurs opened doors, assistants handled schedules, and hotel staff greeted Emma by name. Now she walked among crowds that barely noticed her existence. Commuters hurried toward train stations without making eye contact. Business professionals carrying expensive coffee cups brushed past her shoulders without apologizing. A security guard outside a luxury office building watched her carefully until she crossed the street. assuming she did not belong near the entrance. Emma felt invisible in a way she had never experienced before. The expensive world she usually lived in suddenly seemed separated from ordinary life by something more powerful than money. It was separated by assumptions people made after seeing only a person's appearance. By mid-morning, Emma entered one of her own company's stores. She wanted to observe employees without revealing who she was. Inside, colorful displays promoted seasonal sales, while cheerful music filled the air. A young mother struggled to calm a crying toddler while searching for discounted school supplies. An elderly veteran politely asked an employee for help reaching an item on a high shelf. The employee sighed loudly before pointing toward another aisle instead of helping. Emma quietly watched customers wait in long checkout lines while 2 cash registers remained closed. When she approached a supervisor to ask where the nearest restroom was, he barely looked at her before saying, "Customers only." The words stung because she knew the company policy clearly required employees to treat everyone respectfully. Instead of confronting anyone, Emma simply thanked the supervisor and left. Her heart felt heavier with every step. The glossy reports describing outstanding customer service suddenly seemed meaningless. She understood that one rude interaction did not represent the entire company, but it revealed something important. Policies printed in employee manuals meant very little unless kindness existed in everyday behavior. Emma wrote detailed notes inside a small notebook hidden in her backpack. She recorded everything she observed, including the supervisor's name displayed on his badge. More importantly, she recorded how the experience made her feel. For the first time in years, she understood what it was like to enter one of her own stores feeling unwelcome instead of respected. As the afternoon continued, Emma wandered through different neighborhoods, taking buses instead of private cars and standing in lines with everyone else. She noticed how differently people treated those who appeared wealthy compared to those who looked poor. At one cafe, customers wearing business suits received friendly greetings and quick service. When Emma entered a few minutes later, the cashier impatiently informed her she needed to buy something immediately or leave, because seating was reserved for paying customers. Emma purchased the cheapest cup of coffee using part of her limited cash. She quietly sat near the window, listening to conversations around her. No one recognized the billionaire sitting only a few feet away. For the first time in many years, she felt completely anonymous. Hours passed, and the simple budget she had given herself began disappearing. Bus fares, coffee, and a small bottle of water left only a few dollars in her pocket. Hunger slowly replaced curiosity. Emma realized how carefully struggling families had to calculate every purchase. Buying one unnecessary item could mean skipping dinner later that evening. The realization humbled her deeply. She had approved million-dollar investments without hesitation. Yet now, she found herself wondering whether she should spend her last few dollars on food or save them in case of an emergency. She imagined parents making similar decisions every single day while trying to care for their children. The thought stayed with her as the afternoon sunlight slowly faded behind Chicago's skyline. As evening approached, the summer heat gave way to a cool breeze. Emma walked toward a public park surrounded by food trucks preparing to close for the night. The delicious smell of grilled burgers, tacos, and roasted vegetables filled the air, making her empty stomach ache even more. She checked her pocket and counted the remaining money. It wasn't enough to buy a proper meal without leaving herself completely broke. She watched families laughing together while friends shared food at picnic tables. Although surrounded by people, Emma suddenly felt alone. She sat quietly on a weathered wooden bench beneath an old maple tree, wrapping her hoodie tightly around herself as the evening air grew colder. Not far away, a tired man parked his delivery van after finishing another exhausting shift. His name was Daniel Brooks. At 34 years old, he worked 2 jobs almost every day. After losing his wife Sarah to cancer 4 years earlier, Since then, every decision he made revolved around his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. He skipped vacations, sold his motorcycle, and often ignored his own needs just to make sure Lily never felt the full weight of their financial struggles. That evening, his shoulders ached from carrying heavy packages all day, and his stomach growled with hunger. Inside a small paper bag rested the only sandwich he had managed to buy before beginning his evening deliveries. It was supposed to be his dinner after nearly 14 hours of work. Daniel sat on a nearby bench preparing to eat when he noticed the woman across from him. Her clothes looked old, her face appeared exhausted, and she stared quietly toward the food trucks with the unmistakable expression of someone trying to ignore hunger. He hesitated for a moment, looking down at the sandwich in his hands. It was all he had until the next morning, and he knew another meal wasn't guaranteed. Then he remembered the promise he had made to himself after Sarah's death, that no matter how difficult life became, he would never allow hardship to take away his compassion. Taking a slow breath, Daniel stood up, picked up the paper bag, and walked toward the lonely woman sitting beneath the maple tree, completely unaware that his next simple act would change both of their lives forever. Daniel stopped a few feet away from the bench, holding the small paper bag in his hand. For a brief moment he wondered if the woman might feel embarrassed by his offer, but the sadness in her eyes reminded him too much of the lonely nights he had spent after losing his wife. Smiling gently, he cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me, ma'am. I know this isn't much, but would you like to share my sandwich? It seems like you could use something to eat." Emma looked up, surprised that a complete stranger had noticed her. She immediately shook her head, insisting he should keep it because he looked just as tired as she felt. Daniel laughed softly. "Then I guess we'll both eat half," he replied, taking a seat beside her. Emma accepted the offer with hesitation. She knew the sandwich was probably his only meal, and guilt settled in her chest as Daniel carefully tore it into 2 equal pieces. He even handed her the larger half without making a comment. She thanked him sincerely before taking the first bite. It was an ordinary turkey sandwich from a neighborhood grocery store, yet after spending the entire day hungry, it tasted better than many expensive dinners she had attended in luxury hotels. More important than the food itself was the kindness behind it. Daniel didn't know who she was, how much money she owned, or whether he would ever see her again. He simply saw another human being who needed help. For several minutes they ate quietly while watching children laugh on a nearby playground. The sounds of families enjoying the evening filled the park with warmth. Emma finally broke the silence by introducing herself simply as Emily, choosing a different name to protect her identity. Daniel introduced himself without hesitation and pointed toward a small photo tucked inside his wallet. It showed a smiling little girl wearing oversized glasses and holding a science fair ribbon. "That's my daughter Lily," he said proudly. "She's 8 years old and already smarter than I am. She wants to become a doctor someday." His face brightened as he spoke about her dreams, making it clear that she was the center of his world. Emma asked whether Lily's mother would be joining them later. The smile on Daniel's face faded slightly, though it never disappeared completely. He looked toward the darkening sky before answering quietly. "Sarah passed away 4 years ago after fighting cancer. Lily was only 4 then. It hasn't been easy, but every morning I remind myself that my daughter still deserves a happy childhood." Emma offered her condolences, noticing there was no bitterness in his voice. Instead of blaming life for his hardships, Daniel spoke with quiet acceptance. His strength impressed her far more than any speech she had ever heard from successful business leaders. As their conversation continued, Daniel shared pieces of his daily routine. Every morning, he woke before sunrise to prepare Lily's breakfast and lunch before taking her to school. After finishing his first delivery job, He drove across town to work evening shifts, transporting supplies for local businesses. Most nights he arrived home after 9 o'clock, exhausted but determined to help Lily with homework before she went to bed. He admitted that some months paying rent felt almost impossible. Bills continued arriving, while his paycheck seemed to disappear faster every week. Even so, he refused to let Lily see fear in his eyes. "Children shouldn't carry adult worries," he said quietly. Emma listened more than she spoke. Throughout the day, she had observed people judging others by appearance, but Daniel was different. He never asked why she looked tired, never questioned her situation, and never tried to satisfy his curiosity. Instead, he treated her with dignity, as though sharing a meal with a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. She asked him whether he had family nearby who could help. Daniel smiled sadly. His parents had passed away years earlier, and Sarah had been an only child. "It's mostly just Lily and me," he explained, "but she's enough reason to keep moving forward every single day." The conversation turned toward hope rather than hardship. Daniel described how Lily loved reading books about famous doctors and scientists. Every birthday she asked for books instead of expensive toys. She even kept a small notebook where she wrote medical words she didn't understand, promising herself she would learn them one day. Daniel admitted he had secretly started saving a few dollars every week for her college education, even though the amount was still very small. "Maybe I'll never save enough," he admitted, "but I want her to know I believed in her dreams from the beginning." Emma felt a lump forming in her throat as she imagined the sacrifices hidden behind those simple words. After finishing the last bite of the sandwich, Emma looked at Daniel thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded. "You barely know me. You worked all day, you're obviously hungry yourself, and you still gave away half of your only dinner. Why?" Daniel leaned back against the bench and smiled as though the answer were obvious. "Because I hoped someone would do the same for Lily if she ever needed help." He paused before adding, "Kindness isn't something you save until you become rich. If you wait for the perfect time to be generous, that time never comes." Emma remained silent, letting his words sink in. During board meetings, executives often discussed generosity through charitable donations and corporate campaigns worth millions of dollars. Yet this exhausted father had just demonstrated a far greater act of kindness by giving away something he genuinely needed himself. His sacrifice carried a value that no financial report could measure. Emma realized she had spent years evaluating leadership through profits, efficiency, and productivity, while overlooking the importance of compassion shown in ordinary moments. Sitting beside Daniel, she understood that true leadership often existed far from executive offices. Sometimes it appeared quietly on a park bench beside a stranger. The evening breeze grew colder, and Daniel checked the time on his inexpensive wristwatch. He still needed to stop by the grocery store before going home, because Lily had asked for apples to pack in her lunchbox. He apologized for leaving, but explained that his daughter worried whenever he arrived late. Emma smiled warmly and thanked him once, again for the meal and the conversation. Before standing, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out 5 crumpled dollar bills. He offered them to Emma. Shocked, she immediately refused, insisting she couldn't possibly accept his money. Daniel gently folded her fingers around the cash anyway. "Take it," he said softly. "It's not much, but everyone needs a little help sometimes." Emma felt tears threatening to appear. She quietly slipped only $1 from his hand back into his pocket, while allowing him to believe she had accepted the rest. "Thank you," she whispered sincerely. Daniel nodded with a friendly smile before walking toward his aging delivery van. Emma watched him. Emma disappear into the evening traffic, completely unaware that the humble father had just changed her understanding of generosity forever. She remained on the bench long after he had gone, holding the remaining money in her hand and replaying every word of their conversation. By the time she finally stood to leave the park, she had already made a life-changing decision. The next morning, Daniel Brooks would arrive at work expecting another ordinary day, never imagining that the quiet woman he had fed with his last meal was actually the billionaire CEO whose name appeared on every company report he delivered across the city. Daniel woke before dawn the next morning, just as he always did. His small apartment was quiet, except for the sound of the coffee maker humming in the kitchen. He prepared pancakes for Lily because it was Sunday, their one little tradition that never changed no matter how difficult life became. Lily walked into the kitchen rubbing her sleepy eyes before wrapping her arms around her father. "Good morning, Dad," she said with a bright smile. Daniel smiled back, hiding the exhaustion that still weighed on his body. They laughed together over breakfast, and for a few precious minutes, unpaid bills and endless responsibilities disappeared. Daniel never told Lily about sharing his dinner with a stranger the night before, because to him it wasn't something extraordinary. It was simply the right thing to do. After breakfast, Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of the logistics company where he worked part-time delivering supplies to corporate offices across Chicago. Assuming he was being asked to cover another shift, he answered immediately. Instead, the human resources manager spoke in a formal tone. "Mr. Brooks, we'd like you to come to our corporate headquarters at 11. This morning, the executive office has requested a meeting with you." Daniel frowned in confusion. He had never spoken with anyone above his immediate supervisor. "Is something wrong?" he asked nervously. The manager simply replied, "I honestly don't know. They only ask that you arrive on time." The call ended, leaving Daniel with countless questions and growing anxiety. The company headquarters was one of the most impressive buildings in downtown Chicago. Daniel had delivered packages there many times, but had never been allowed beyond the reception area. Wearing his cleanest shirt and carefully pressed pants, he entered the lobby feeling completely out of place among executives in tailored suits. The receptionist greeted him politely and handed him a visitor badge before asking him to wait. Minutes later, another employee escorted him into a private elevator leading directly to the executive floor. Daniel's heart pounded with every passing second. He silently wondered whether he had unknowingly broken a company policy or whether budget cuts had finally reached his department. Every possibility that crossed his mind seemed worse than the last. Meanwhile, inside the executive boardroom, senior executives gathered around a long, polished table, whispering among themselves. They had been told the CEO wanted to discuss a new leadership initiative, but knew